If you're wondering why this controller looks so familiar, it's because it's right here. What we're looking at is the BinBok Retro Controller, and it's designed to look just like this, the Nintendo GameCube controller from like 6 million years ago. But why on earth would you want a controller that looks like this? I mean, the buttons are all in the wrong place, you've got these weird clicky edges around the analog stick. Well, the reason is there are some games that were designed with this controller in mind, making this the actual better layout in some cases for certain games. Now, there are all sorts of reasons why you may choose to use a GameCube style controller instead of the Switch Pro controller, but the main one for me is this giant A button right here. Slide these on like so, and you have the weirdest looking Nintendo Switch on earth. I'm just gonna say this up front, but the BinBok Retro Controller is now my preferred way to play Smash on the go. But of course, you're gonna want to know in detail how the BinBok Controller feels in play, whether it's good, whether it's bad, and especially how it compares to the GameCube controller. So, let's check it out. Alright, let's have a good look at the BinBok Retro Controller for the Nintendo Switch. As you know, of course, this is a GameCube style controller. You can remove it from the console, you can play them wirelessly if you want to. But then, of course, I think the main feature of this is that you can hold a GameCube style controller but be playing in handheld mode. So of course you have the ergonomics of a GameCube controller. You have that pistol style grip like you normally have on a wireless pad, as opposed to the flat way that you have to hold the standard Joy-Cons. You have your standard analog sticks on the left side and the right side, but of course it's like the GameCube style, so this one is yellow because on the GameCube this was the C stick, and even though they are standard analog sticks that can do everything that normal analog sticks can do, including being clicked in like so, they also have these octagonal gates built in. You can absolutely play Smash without these gates, but sometimes you can find it useful for knowing exactly what angle you're at. I know that some professional players even add extra notches to these gates so they can get all the angles in between the 8 main angles. The same thing goes for the C-stick. The gate is actually a little bit more important on the C-stick because if you are playing a game that is using GameCube controls, you'll want to know that you're pressing exactly up, down, left, or right on the C-stick. You also have a standard D-pad, and although I have used other BinBok controllers before, for example, this is a BinBok controller that I've actually done a video on in the past, I quite liked this D-pad, but the issue was when you did something like a fireball motion, which is down, down, forward, forward, I would sometimes miss the diagonal. Well, I can happily report that the D-pad on the BinBok Joycon is actually a little bit nicer. I don't know if they've actually changed anything, but in standard use, just pressing with a normal amount of pressure, I didn't ever find really that I was missing any diagonal motions. So the D-pad's actually quite nice, but unfortunately, you're not going to be using the D-pad that often in something like Street Fighter because the next feature is the action buttons. This GameCube style layout is not designed for games like Street Fighter where pressing Y and B at the same time is necessary. Instead, you can do things like pressing X and A at the same time, which I find really useful in a game like Smash because personally I don't use up to jump. But if you press a button to jump, then you can also make certain things kind of easier. So for example, if you want to just jump and then immediately do an attack, in this mode, you could also just press these two buttons at the same time. On a normal Pro controller, pressing jump and the attack button, the A button at the same time, is also really easy. But something you can't do on a normal Joy-Con or a Pro controller is press A and Y at the same time easily. You can maybe use your nail like this to kind of press the A and the Y button at the same time. But the reason the GameCube controller is so cool is that if you have a function mapped to Y and you want to press Y and A at the same time, that is also possible. If I want to do a jump and attack at the same time, but I want to do a down attack, it's so easy because I just press down and 2 buttons like this and it's instant like that. You also get some action buttons on the back. So unlike a GameCube controller, you actually have an L1 button. So this is R1, L1, you've got R2 and L2. Now if you compare this with a GameCube controller, this is the back of the GameCube controller, and as you can see, these have quite a lot of travel to them. So immediately we've got one area where I think that the BinBok controller is actually easier to use than the GameCube controller, because one, you have to press quite far in to actuate this button, but secondly, it's quite difficult to press this button and the R1 button at the same time, or rather it's called the Z button on here. And it's difficult to go between them because you have to like get your finger over this ridge over here to like lift over the ridge and then press the Z button. As opposed to the BinBok controller, it's just a lot more like a standard Pro controller. You've just got the shoulder button and the trigger button, and you can press them at the same time, and you can flip back and forth, and you can roll your finger from them really easily. And like I mentioned earlier, you don't have an L1 button. You actually get L1 and you also get L2. You also have two buttons that are not on a GameCube controller. This is something that is really useful in modern controllers, and you can program these back buttons to be anything you like. I can program it super easily just by pressing this M button and then whatever button I want to use. So M and A, and I actually feel the controller vibrate. I press the button and now it is set. What used to be the A button is now also available on here. You'll have to double check tournament rules to see whether that's actually allowed. This back button is supremely easy and comfortable to press. There are some back buttons that are kind of flat on here and you end up having to press them with your fingers like this. But because it's on the inside of this pistol grip, it's just so natural. They are completely separate. You can't use this button over here to do something on the left side, and you can't do this button over here to control something on the right side. But let's say I want to use my shield. I can also do that with the back button by holding the M button, the shield, and then I heard a vibration, I felt a vibration, pressed the back button, and now I've got shield available on the shoulder button or on the back button. You can hold down the memory button and you can set a D-pad button to the back button over here. And I don't actually have to move my thumb away from the analog stick just to taunt. I can be using full-on motion with the analog stick, and then I could use a separate finger for my taunts. The feature right next to the back button setting is this, the turbo button. If I hold this down and I press a button, I can now set this button to be turbo. It's just constantly getting that input sent to the game. I don't think there's ever really a situation where you would want a turbo feature set to your shield, but of course in other games this could be super helpful, especially retro games where pressing buttons repetitively is just a genuine waste of time. The last things to show you are the plus and the minus buttons. Minus doesn't do anything in Smash, but this, as you can see, is just a normal start menu. It's not mushy, and I really like that because there are some controllers that have like nice clicky buttons and then they're actually kind of mushy on the plus and the minus buttons. The home button is similar, and the screenshot button, again, feels exactly the same as these buttons up here. It's actually included in the box for this is a number of attachments. So let's say that you're playing a first-person shooter and you want better accuracy. You can use this longer analog stick, put this on, and now you have a wider range of movement. Or rather, the distance that you push, the sort of circumference of the circle, is now much longer. On the right side, you can also remove the C-stick one, or, it's just the right analog stick, and you can also replace this with a more accurate, tall, sort of sniper attachment. But the last attachment is the one that makes it look just like an actual GameCube controller, because it's just a nub. On the original GameCube controller, they went from the N64, which was 4 separate buttons, to this C stick, where you had up, left, right, and down. This is what it looks like on an actual GameCube controller. You can't remove this. This is built into the controller. That's another reason why the BinBok controller is actually kind of nicer than a standard GameCube controller, because you can just remove this and set it with a normal analog stick cover. And lastly, if you really are a maniac, you can remove the analog stick cover and replace it with a nub. I don't really know any situation where this would actually be preferable. Now, it's unlikely you're going to be using this controller for Street Fighter because of the weird layout of the GameCube controller on the right side, but I do want to just show you that the D-pad is quite reasonable. Honestly, I don't feel like I get accidental jumps or anything. Fireball, you can see the fireballs on the right side are fine. Fireballs on the left side, absolutely fine. If I try to do a super combo, absolutely no issues whatsoever. Just wanted to show you that, this D-pad is perfectly capable of doing the basic things that you need to do. Alright, I'm in Panel de Pon right now. Just wanted to show you that even though this is like a one-button game, the main button that you do press in this game is the A button. On the GameCube controller, all of these buttons are quite soft. Like, you hear them a little bit, but you can actually press them silently. Though, not this button. This is really loud and annoying. On the BinBok Joycons, this A button, actually all of these buttons are kind of loud. The B button's not so bad. The Y and the X buttons you can press almost silently, but the A button, it's like really difficult to press this button silently. I just can't really find a way to do it. Now, normally this isn't going to be an issue, but if you play games late at night, or you share a bed or a bedroom or a dorm with someone who doesn't like the noise from playing video games, this button is going to be kind of annoying. Compared to the Nintendo Switch Pro Controller, this D-pad is significantly nicer. When I play on the Nintendo Switch Pro Controller, like, I don't know what button is going to get pressed. When I press, like, I'm absolutely certain I've pressed right or I've pressed left, and I'll get like some sort of diagonal or jump or something. Like the D-pad on the Nintendo Switch Pro Controller just does not work for me. The last thing after that is the 6-axis gyro. So it's really great that there is actually a gyro built in. That is something that third-party Joy-Con controller makers could easily leave out, but you can use this for your Splatoon controls. Now, of course, I'm hooked up to the Nintendo Switch, so it's probably just using the gyro built into the Nintendo Switch. But if I were to remove the Joy-Cons, I am now in control of the game using just the BinBok Joy-Cons. And actually, you can see all of the control is only from the gyro in the right side. This is the attachment that comes with the controller. I'll just slide this in here. It's nice and slim so that you've got yourself in a, really nice GameCube design. In fact, you can basically see that the buttons are in almost exactly the same place when it's in this little attachment here. So as you can see, I've got my motion controls. I can look up, look down, look to the left, look to the right. And I found that in general, it doesn't lose tracking. And what I mean by that, it doesn't get like decentered. So if I turn to the left and I turn to the middle again, I'm still looking at the same place. Sometimes on other controllers, like, you have to be very careful, like, is it actually bringing me back to where I was? Like, will I turn to the right and actually come back to where I was looking? And it seems to be pretty good. Even if I move this quite quickly, I do end up where I'm predicting that I'm supposed to end up. Something I did find on the previous BinBok Joy-Con is that this felt a little bit slower than the standard Joy-Con. So now that I'm on the normal Joy-Cons, let's see if the speed feels as fast, and I'll do this in slow motion. The more that I play with this BinBok Retro Controller, the more I love it. It just solves all the problems that I didn't really like about the actual GameCube controller, like the fact that this D-pad is useless. You can't click this in for L3, you can't click this in for R3. The R2 and the L2 buttons have way too much travel. I don't need that on a Nintendo Switch. You've only got the options button, there's no minus button, and you certainly don't have a home button and a screenshot button. You don't have the L1 button, and then on top of all of that, you still have to plug it in. This is not a wireless controller. You gotta use this cable with the GameCube connection and an adapter. Just pull these things off, plug them onto my Nintendo Switch like so, and you've just got, it just never ceases to make me laugh how it looks when it's plugged in. It doesn't look like a GameCube controller on a Switch. It looks like someone put a GameCube in my GameCube controller and I'm walking around with the actual console. Now by this point, I think you probably already have a good idea as to whether the BinBok Retro Controller is the one for you. But I want to point out one more thing, and it's the fact that when you have this in handheld mode, so you're locked in place like this, the fact that it's got these pistol grip shapes to the controller means that you're kind of forced to hold the Nintendo Switch at an angle that you might not normally hold it. Personally, I like to hold my Nintendo Switch like this, so the screen is facing me, and with normal Joy-Con controls, that doesn't feel so strange. So for example, if I were to put my normal Joy-Cons on here, you can see it's really not that difficult to play at this angle. With the BinBok Retro Controller, you do find that the screen is always tilted a little bit up like this. Or you tilt your hands like this, and you've got this like weird angle on your wrist. It's not that big a problem that I wouldn't use this controller. Like, I don't mind kind of changing the angle that I hold the Switch, or maybe holding it somewhere in between like this and just bending my wrists a little bit, because for all of the convenience and the features that you get from the Retro Controller, I think it's absolutely a trade-off that's worth it. And I don't even really know how I would fix this. It's just something you have to accept, that with the design of the GameCube paddles, that you are locked into a certain angle which feels really comfortable. As you can see, it's like very natural to hold it like this, but basically the screen is like parallel to my table, so I'm looking straight down at the screen when I really want the screen to be facing me like this. But as you can see, look, now I've got this angle on my wrist here, and it's not super comfortable. So somewhere in the middle seems to be quite nice. One last thing I will also point out is that the ridges on these analog sticks, they are quite tough. An original GameCube controller, it's actually got like a dome shape to it, and it feels like it's got a rubber kind of texture to it. Just be aware that these are much harder and also flatter. I've got to say, I'm really in love with this thing, and it's because it just does a lot of things really well. And one of the biggest surprises to me was how good this D-pad is, even though it's not really the perfect controller for fighting games. Well, that's about it for the BinBok Retro Controller. As you can see, it's my preferred way to play Smash on the go, and even for other games like Mario Kart. Maybe not so much for games like Street Fighter, but there are plenty of games, especially with N64 games now available on Nintendo Switch Online. So many places where you may find that you actually prefer to use the GameCube layout. On a very basic level, it's just nicer to use than normal Joy-Cons because you've got a real D-pad, you've got these giant analog sticks, and you've got this really easy to press A button. So especially if you're playing retro games and you only really need an A and a B button, it just feels right at home. At first I thought $65, that's a little bit steep, but there are not that many companies making a GameCube style Joy-Con for the Switch. Something that connects to it so you can use it in handheld mode, something that you can remove and play as a wireless controller, something that has a 6-axis gyro built in so that you can use it for motion games like Splatoon, and it also has vibration inside. When you factor all of those features in, actually $65 is kind of a bargain for this sort of thing. As with any product, you'll have to check in with me later down the line to see whether it has held up, but for right now, this is my preferred way to play games like Smash on my Nintendo Switch in handheld mode. And to be honest, even in docked mode, I'll probably use this controller just because they work wirelessly as well. If you loved the video, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment below with exactly what game you think would work best with the BinBok Retro Controller, and like the video if you haven't done so already. Be sure to check out this video next if you're really into Switch games, controllers, and that sort of thing. That's all for now. I've been NihongoGamer. I'll see you real soon.